Welcome to the Chapter 6 Quiz 1 Review Explanation and Answer Key Guide for Algebra 1. So the review that we're looking at in the 12 questions here will look very similar to Friday's quiz. Again, with the directions, make sure in order to get full credit that you are both solving and graphing your solution on the number line. So first solve the inequality and then graph the solution on a number line. So what I would recommend doing first, if all the questions have that same direction so you don't forget, is you could go into every problem and just set up a blank number line so that you remember after you solve the problems. So that's what you actually can kind of tell I did on all of mine. That's why there's gaps here. I went in, just drew all my blank number lines so that I remembered to go back and graph my answers. So on each of these problems, again, keep in mind, if we have strictly greater than or less than, you'll be graphing with an open circle. If it is less than or equal to or greater than or equal to, you will use a filled in circle. Then on any of the problems that are single inequalities, so the ones that do not have the variable in the middle, or an or statement, so kind of like these first few we'll look at, any single inequalities, you're only going to have one arrow or one number indicated for an answer. Any of the compound inequalities, where the variable is in the middle, or we have an or statement, then you will have two numbers that either give you a connection or two opposite arrows. So as we go through these, the other one rule to keep in mind is if we're multiplying or dividing by a negative at any point, then you flip the sign. So in the first one, we just had to subtract 6 from each side. So b is greater than -8. Open circle, arrow going greater than. For 2, we have to multiply each side by -3, so we flip the inequality, and w is less than or equal to a -15, so it's a filled-in circle, arrow going less than. Now, what you'll see on all of my number lines is I did not draw in all the numbers. I just indicated where 0 would be compared to my other number, so then you knew which direction was positive or negative. So again, 3 and 4, we just have single inequalities. So solving for the variable in 3, we end up with x is less than or equal to 7. And in 4, y is greater than 9. So in 3, we have a filled in circle, 4 open circle, and draw in your arrows. Then 5 and 6, we still have single inequalities. They just have a couple extra steps compared to the first couple problems, especially number 6. In 5, subtract the 2 from each side and divide by the -3. So we end up with n is greater than or equal to -5. So our circle filled in at -5, arrow going greater than. In number 6, because we have the value in parentheses, the first thing we have to do is use the distributive property. So we would take the -5 times x and the -5 times the -4. So that becomes -5x plus 20 is greater than 15. Then we can subtract the 20 and divide each side by -5. So it becomes x is less than 1. Now with 7 and 8, because we have variables on both sides, what you want to do is get the variable to one side and then solve for the variable. So in 7, the first thing was add 2x to each side. Then add the 33 to each side, giving us 17x is less than 51. Divide by 17, and x is less than 3. In 8, we first have to use the distributive property with the -2, and then we have -2x minus 8 is greater than or equal to 6x minus 4. So add the 2x to each side. -8 is greater than or equal to 8x minus 4. Add the 4 to each side, and then divide by 8. So -1/2 is greater than or equal to x, or we could read that as x is less than or equal to a -1/2. So filled in circle at a -1/2, arrow going less than. Now with 9, 10, 11, and 12, we get into compound inequalities. So these ones, my answers have to deal with two numbers. The way I know they're a compound inequality is if they have this or statement, or if the variable is in between two different inequality symbols. So in number 9, with the or statement, we just separate the two inequalities and solve them separately. So subtract the 9 from each side and divide by 2. X is greater than 4. On the other side, subtract the 11 from each side, then divide by 5, and x is less than or equal to -3. So then, because it's an or statement, I know my arrows are going opposite directions. So anytime you have an or statement, arrows go the opposite way. First one, -3 filled in, less than. Other one, at the 4 with an open circle, greater than. In 10, because the variable's in the middle, I know eventually that my two answers will be connected. So the first thing I have to do is subtract the 1 from all three parts. So that becomes -4 is less than or equal to 2p, which is less than or equal to 8. Divide every part by 2, and it becomes -2 is less than or equal to p, which is less than or equal to 4. Or we could also read that as p is greater than or equal to -2 and less than or equal to 4. So both circles are filled in, one at -2, one at 4, and the line segment connecting them. Then 11, we have the variable in the middle, so it's another and scenario. So I know the two answers will be connected. So we have to start with subtracting 1 from all parts, and then dividing by -6, which causes both signs to flip. So our final solution would be n is less than 2 and greater than or equal to -6. So we have a filled in circle at -6, open circle at 2, segment connecting. In 12, it's an or scenario, so all I do is separate the two inequalities and solve each one separately. So for 12 on the left, we have to solve for b, subtract 4 from each side, and divide by 5. B is greater than 4. And then on the right, we have to solve for x, so we have to subtract 16 from each side, divide by -2, so we have to flip our inequality sign, and x is less than -1. So for both numbers, it is open circles at 4 and -1, and then the arrow from -1 going less than, arrow from 4 going greater than. So your quiz will look very similar to this review. You will have to both solve and graph the inequalities. And again, make sure that you're showing your work, showing your setup and thought process for partial credit, and be careful with which way you draw your arrows for greater than or less than.